Good morning, everybody. Mark Gilbert here again with you. It's great to be back hosting the Saturday morning Science of Mind conversation series. This morning, we're going to be looking at Chapter 4 out of the Science of Mind textbook, which is entitled Soul. More on that in just a moment. I just want to thank you for tuning in today, or those of you who are watching on the recording after the fact. Hope that this is beneficial for you. I want to do something a little bit different this morning. I thought maybe we might start with an affirmative prayer. So let's just go within for a moment. Let's just feel into the nature of life, that there is only one life, one power, one divine essence that moves in and through everything and gives everything its very being, that we live in a universe of unity, and that in our human awareness and our human minds, we take this unity and we divide it up. We divide it up and map it out and give it names and labels so that we can understand it better. But at its root, everything is one. There's only this one power, and it moves in and through us, and that we have these individualized expressions of the divine as our own lives. You and I, and the names that we call ourselves, and all of the stories that we tell ourselves about our individual lives are simply a individualized way in which that one expresses and knows itself through us. As Aurobindo liked to say, that we exist for the delight of the divine. We exist for the delight of the divine. Late in his years, Ernest Holmes liked to quote that as well, recognizing that our very existence is an experience, so that the divine or God or spirit or whatever name you wish to call it is experiencing life through us. And we know that deeply this day, that all of the worldly affairs and all of the things that are going on are all simply an expression of the divine. We've been put here and given free will choice to make our choices and actions in a way that can be directed towards seeing ourselves as separate and apart. And we can do that for a while and then eventually return and remember our truth of our unity. Unity doesn't mean uniformity. We're well aware of that. But we know in this unity of spirit that there is a multiplicity of ways in which spirit expresses itself. Some in which are for the greatest and highest good for all, and some that are not. And so I know in this moment that there are many people on this planet who may be feeling angst and concern over actions in the world of form, telling themselves stories about how it is less than what they desire. And I understand that, and we know, and we look through all of these stories, and we anchor ourselves in love and in truth, and in the recognition that there is only this one life, and that ultimately each and every expression of the one will remember that truth and move into it in a greater and higher way, letting go of any sense of separation, fear, competition, and act and move from a space of love and unity and oneness. We know this is our ultimate path, and we bless that path, knowing that each day, every day, more and more people feel and know and sense that unity and act from that oneness. So we thank you, Spirit. Thank you for the gift of this life. We thank you for this opportunity to come together in conversation this morning. And we thank you for the love that supports us in all that we do. And so it is. So thank you all for being with us today. As I mentioned a moment ago, we're going to be looking at the topic of soul. And we're going to be looking specifically at Chapter 4 of the Science of Mind textbook. But I do want to invite those of you who are joining live to drop into the chat in whatever way that you are viewing this program, be it YouTube, etc., Facebook, that you drop a little comment that says what your name is and where you're from so we can get a sense of who all is here today. And I'm going to invite you throughout the presentation today, throughout this conversation, to be able to freely drop any comments and thoughts that you have into that, and to the degree that they fit or appropriate or that we can work them in. I want to make this a dialogue, as I always do. And so let me just stop here for a moment and mention just a few things. Let's see. Okay. So you can see it's with me. There's the banner on that. And we are asking for you to put your name and location in the comment field. And let's see who all we might have with us today. And let's see. Shay, good morning, Shay. I believe you're in Colorado, if I recall correctly. So you might just correct me if I'm wrong on that. So good morning and great to have you with us today. Maria, and so it is. Yes, Maria, putting a little capstone on that prayer, that affirmative prayer I was doing a moment ago. Thank you. And let's see, we have Roy tuning in from Fort Morgan. Thank you, Roy, for being with us. And thank you for the email I got this morning from you. That was very nice as well. Let's see, Mara Susa. Okay. And okay, and she's correcting herself. I'm just going through the comments here and clicking on them. So there we go. Maria, thank you for correcting that. And let's see, Lonnie Parter here from Ontario, Canada. Welcome, Canada. We bless you and glad to have you with us today. And Shay, of course, is confirming my thoughts that that she is from Colorado. I remember her coming on in the last time I was here, and in fact, several of the times. And just love coming and joining you guys and talking about Science of Mind on a Saturday morning. Maria is from San Jose, and I assume San Jose is San Jose, California, right? And let's see, we've got Liz from Buffalo, New York. Hello, Liz. Welcome, and thanks for tuning in and enjoying the Saturday morning conversation. And again, anybody who's just joining us and watching live, I would love for you to put your name and location in the comment field, like the banner is telling you, and also to, feel free to jump in with any comments and thoughts that you've got. And let's see, Maria is confirming, yes, California, Edward Villeneuve's area, right? He's one of my favorite New Thought ministers, good friend of mine. Anyway, it's great to have all of you here, and look forward to all of your comments. As the banner says on the screen, or the little insert, we're talking about soul from chapter 4 of the Science of Mind textbook. Now, just to set the context, in this series, we are going through the Science of Mind textbook in sort of a chronological fashion. And we did the 4-part introduction over the first 4 weeks. And we've also launched into the full chapters, chapter 1 dealing with God, 2 with mind, 3 with spirit. And the first 3 actually, if you take God and mind and spirit, they're all discussing the aspect of the spiritual truth of who we are, where we come from, the fact that we are all, the divine expressions of God or mind, that mind is a consciousness that moves in and through us and is something we can tap into. And spirit is that spiritual essence and truth from which we live. And then spirit also begins sort of a 3-part chapter where Holmes is dividing up, or mentally mapping is a term I like to use. He's mentally mapping the unity of oneness into parts so we can better understand it. And so we start with the concept that everything is one, everything is mind, everything is God. And then we say, okay, but how can we better grasp how all of this works? And much of our everyday lives are anchored in this material, physical world where we think we're separate and apart from one another. We're in relationship with one another. We have the sense that we are going through experiences of moments of time that are being broken up, and that we are making choices and doing things. And so we experience the becoming nature of our lives through the process of time. But Holmes wants to break it into 3 parts so we can better understand that unity. And he takes that into something called the Science of Mind teaching symbol, which I've put up on the screen here. And many of you, if you're in Science of Mind, you've probably already seen this many times. It's also reflected in multiple charts in the back of the Science of Mind textbook. And just to very briefly review this teaching symbol for you, because it is relative to our conversation today regarding soul, is that Holmes takes the divine oneness of everything and puts it into this symbol, saying God, the all, the thing itself, created this manifest universe. And here's a little tidbit for you you might not always think about. I know when I first came to the teaching, I sort of thought that circle was the totality of the universe and God. But Holmes also teaches that God, or the thing itself, created this universe, but it's not absorbed into the universe. So what does that mean? It means that God created what this circle represents, the manifest universe, both in its expressions of form. What do we mean by form? The world of stuff, matter and space and time, the relationship world. But he also created the non-material world, and that is the world of spirit and soul. So spirit, soul, body, reflected in the three divisions of this teaching symbol, are all one aspect. There's just different ways in which the universe is expressing. It's expressing in a non-material aspect in spirit and soul, and it's experiencing in a physical aspect in terms of body. But here's the thing that a lot of people are not really, they don't really think about so much, is that Holmes says that God, or the thing itself, created this universe, everything that's contained in that map of that circle, but he's not absorbed into it. So God's both outside the circle and inside the circle. God is in that area that transcends the circle itself. And so God, or the thing itself, created this universe, or we could say created multiple of these, multiple universes, and that God, or the divine, sits outside all of it and experiences itself through these expressions. Now, that's a little bit of somewhat of an esoteric concept, but it's one that I think it's interesting to note, because there's sometimes people think that we're like a nature or pantheistic philosophy where all is God. And what we're actually is a panentheistic philosophy where the divine created everything and everything is God, but God is more than the thing it created. And I hope you make that distinction, although it's not critical for our conversation today on soul. The reason that I bring this teaching symbol up at the very beginning is to represent the fact that Holmes was trying to find ways for us to understand how the universe works in a better way. And so he created these maps to say, okay, everything is one. So we can look at the circle and say all is one. But in this oneness of the universe that's been created for our expression and for the expression in the delight of the divine, it expresses itself in three different ways. It expresses itself in the spiritual aspect, which is our conscious cause, and this was covered a lot in your last Saturday morning. And that is the nature where there is conscious awareness, the ability of choice and thought. And then there's a second aspect to this entire oneness, and that is something called the subconscious medium or soul, and it's often called in many of the charts law, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But there's this middle aspect that has an aspect that is subjective to spirit. We'll come back and talk about what that means. And it's also, it's the creative medium that acts upon thought and manifests the world of form. And that's why the symbol has the downward symbol of the downward V, is to represent the fact that thoughts in the realm of spirit are acted upon by a creative medium called soul, and then soul creates the world of form. And that's how we can say that thoughts are created, or thoughts are things, is because the thoughts that are consciously thought in the realm of spirit are acted upon a medium called soul or law, and then it creates this manifest physical universe in which we live and move and have our being. And then all of it dissolves and goes back into the non-material. So there's a continuous flow from the aspects of the non-material into the material and out of the material and back into the non-material. And it's sort of equated, and you can think about Einstein's E equal MC2, where one side of it is energy and the other side is mass. Energy is the non-physical and mass is the physical, and that there's an interchange between the two, that energy or the non-material moves into being stuff, stuff moves back into being non-stuff. There's this continuous flow, and that thoughts, through the conscious power of thoughts and anchoring matter into a form, is the creative process that we can all tap into. Now, before I move on from the symbol, I want to say that when Holmes uses it, and when we often teach it, we teach it in two capacities. One is, how does the universe work from the aspect of the all, or God? And how does it work in our individualized lives as individualized expressions of the one? Even though everything is one and interconnected, this aspect of the creative process represented in this chart plays out a little bit differently in the aspects of the all, or God, or spirit, than it does in our individual lives. Because our consciousness can't absorb and be aware of the totality of all it is. It has a limited understanding of how the universe works. And hence, in what Holmes later calls, or in multiple times calls, mental equivalence, our minds aren't big enough to grasp all that spirit or the all knows. And so we have sort of a reduced aspect to the divine. And the reason I bring this differentiation up is because in this chapter, Holmes slightly says it, and you may not have caught it if you read it, is that this chapter really is talking about how soul works from the concept of spirit. And later on, will, in a further chapter, in chapter 6, gets into how it works in the realm of us as human beings. And so all of the stuff in this chapter is really about the flow and the understanding of soul and law and the subjective consciousness from a standpoint of God or spirit. And a later chapter talks about how we use it in our own individual lives. So just start with that. And let's see. Aloha from Patrick over in Kauai. My wife and I got married on the southern beach of Kauai many years ago. Beautiful island. Love Kauai. And let's see. All right. So let's jump into some of the interesting quotes in here. And again, if you have a question, just drop it in the comment field. I want to make sure that if you've got a question about what I'm talking about, or something you want to add to it, that we bring that into the mix. And so the next one is, let's look at a quote from the very first pages of this chapter. He says, "We've spoken of the threefold nature of reality, or God, the trinity of being as spirit, soul, and body." Spirit, soul, body. And then he rephrases what those are: conscious intelligence, subjective law, and form. That's just repeating. Spirit, soul, body. Spirit is conscious intelligence. Soul is subjective law. Body is form. Okay. The threefold unity of reality has been taught by most of the great spiritual philosophies and religions that have been given to the world. And this is true. This is true. If anybody watches any of my videos on my YouTube channel, or reads any of my blogs on my website, which I'll throw the website up in a little while, I like to talk about the fact that we live in sort of a universe that's stratified. And that's just one thing I think would be helpful as you form your own mental map and reading Holmes. I want you to think about that. Everything is one and everything is interconnected, but there's sort of like vibratory levels and a stratification where things move along a continuum from spirit down to body, and that there are vibratory levels that move up. And so in one way of looking at Holmes' teaching symbol is to say at the highest levels of the all is the spiritual realm, and at the lowest levels, or lower vibratory levels, is the world of the body, or of effects and stuff. And in between are multiple areas of the non-material that are vibratory at different levels and acting in different ways. And so this equates to stuff like the chakras. You could think of moving up from root chakras to crown chakras, and the differences that occurs in those levels. We talk oftentimes, you'll hear people talk about different kinds of bodies, the emotional body, mental body, spiritual body, physical body, etc. They're all seen in a stratification. And so this whole process of dividing the oneness up into different levels is best understood sometimes when we put it in a continuum, moving from the highest and finest and most etheric of the divine down to the lowest and most physical of the lowest aspects of the physical form. But everything in between is just vibratory levels and differences. And so this has been something that's been taught. Oftentimes those levels are not taught in the same language that Holmes is teaching. Yes, oftentimes it's spirit, soul, body. Sometimes you'll hear it in terms of spirit, mind, and body or form. But there's always this aspect of God or the greatest or the highest aspect of oneness at the top level of the stratification. And then we come down into levels that are lower than that, but still beyond the physical. And then we get down into where there's sort of a movement in between and into the physical realm that we experience as our human beings. And that's part of what he's getting at in this first quote. Let's move to another one. He says, we're using the word soul in the sense of a universal soul or medium through which spirit operates. This is the point I was making a moment ago, that this chapter is about spirit or God of the all and how it's operating. And he goes on, like the creative soil in which the seeds are planted and from which plant life comes, the soul of the universe is the creative medium into which the word of spirit falls, into which creation rises. Okay. So I wanted to bring this quote out just to highlight the fact that he's saying this chapter is about the use of the soul by spirit in its entirety. And I think I jump ahead. At the very last sentence in this chapter, he says, most of this chapter has been dealt with the universal soul, but in another chapter, we'll discuss more fully the manner in which man, all of us, reenacts the nature of God. And that's in chapter 6. So twice he's reiterating this chapter, and its descriptions are really about the aspect of spirit in its highest and finest levels, into the totality of all it is, how it works using soul. So you might want to keep that in mind when you're reading the chapter. Let's go on to another quote. We should not, however, think of soul and spirit as separate from each other. They're really two parts or aspects of the same thing, each being self-existent and co-eternal with the other. And this gets to the point a second ago I said where this is the simply map making. It's dividing stuff up for our humanness so we can understand things better. There is spirit. The whole circle is one universe, and it's comprised of different ways in which it acts. And Holmes is dividing them up, spirit and soul, into two areas so that we can better understand their actions. But he says, really, they're all one aspect. They're two parts or aspects of the same oneness. And in fact, we can say that we can add into that the body or the effects. Now, we do have some greater distinctions that can occur when we add the body in to soul and spirit. Soul and spirit, I like to think of them as they're the non-material realm of the universe. And very quickly, just as a quick shorthand for you to grasp how all this works, is that spirit is the conscious thoughts of God, or at our level, our own conscious thoughts, and that soul is a way along that stratum that it acts upon thoughts. It acts upon thoughts. And it's what he calls the creative medium. So the thoughts from spirit flow into this creative medium, and then they are manifested or acted upon to create the physical world. And at the level of God or spirit, this is playing out in the bigness and vastness of the universe. And in that later chapter, we come back and talk about, well, how do we as humans, how can we use our thoughts, our conscious thoughts, to move through the creative medium to create our law, which is the basic teachings behind science of mind. Change your thinking, change your life. And how do we employ the creative medium of soul into our making our lives better? And that's really what so much of the philosophy is about. Is about taking our individual lives and seeing how they play into the bigger scheme of things, and then using the power that is within us to manifest that. And one of the confusing things when you start talking about the soul is because it not only is it the creative medium, but especially relevant is the fact that it's also a repository and a connective tissue for the thinking of everything. And so he's going to get into some of the quotes we'll show in a moment about how it's not only is the creative medium that acts upon thoughts, but the soul is also the aspect where there is this flow and interconnectedness of intelligence through everything. And that's how we as humans connect to others, is through the subjective mind. And we'll get into that in just a minute. Let's see, throw a couple of quotes up here. Liz, where else can this be seen? My Facebook is acting up. This is on, if you go to YouTube and search on New Thought Media Network in YouTube, you can find this being streamed there as well. And hopefully your YouTube is working, Liz. Yes, it is very empowering. This philosophy is empowering because, that's one of the things that we teach in Science of Mind is that many times people come to this, in our human stories, we get trained to believe that the body or the world of effects is the only thing that it's real. It's in our face every day. It's so mesmerizing. It is so convincing us that this world, this physical world, is the only reality. And then we tend to buy into it. And in that, we think that we're victims to the external world. And we feel disempowered. We disempowered by all that stuff that's going on in the world, that we think, oh, how can I have any impact on what's going on? What is my role to do? How can I feel powerless and helpless to change my life in reflection of all the stuff that I see out there? So many people, when they come to Science of Mind, feel disempowered. They feel like they're victims. And so we tend to walk people through a process of moving away from being a victim of external circumstances to more and more being empowered by the power that is within you to create your own life. Now, the first step is to move into seeing that you can change your thinking and change your manifest life. And they often say it moves from being life is being done to me as a victim, being life is done by me through the power that I have as an individual to create my thinking. And so there's still an ego-driven aspect of the first steps of using the Science of Mind philosophy. It is an ego-driven aspect where I'm Mark and I'm going to control the world, and I've got the power and presence of the divine within me, and I can use my thinking to create my world. So there's a sort of ego-driven aspect of it that first comes with a sense of being empowered by Science of Mind. But if you stay with the philosophy and you start going deeper with it, you recognize that what Holmes and so many people are really talking about is not using it from an ego-driven way where I'm trying to maintain control and power over the world, but it is an aspect of then moving on into seeing that life is being done through you, that God is flowing through you and experiencing life through your experiences. There is a sense of growing recognition that they are one with everything. The affirmative prayer that is taught in Science of Mind classes, and the first two aspects of it are a very divine, deep prayer for oneness and recognizing the non-dual relationship and reality of life. The first step of the prayer is to know that everything is one, and the second step is to know that you're part of that oneness. And if you take that into a deep essence of your soul, then you really know that you are in this flow of God moving through you. And so that lets go of that ego-driven desire to be somebody where life is done by you, that now life is being done through you. There's this movement of God energy and spirit through you. And the fourth and highest aspect, and probably the one hardest for most humans to maintain, is that life is being done as you. That you are simply one expression, and there is a complete level of surrender that comes within you, of surrendering. You need your ego to navigate the physical world, but you need to let go of your ego in the sense of trying to control the world, and that you can look and know that everything is going to work out okay. So there is a mystical path that's built into that movement. You're a victim, and then you become empowered to move from seeing life being done to you to be done by you. And then as you continue to grow and evolve in your consciousness, you see that life is being done through you, and ultimately life is being done as you. And there is a lessening of the need for human control and reaction to the physical world as you move up that spectrum. So it is very, very empowering. Again, comments. Oh, thank you. BBW Lena. BBW Lena. I like the name. Yeah. And Liz. Okay, Liz. Thank you, Liz. All right. So let me jump to the next quote here. Okay, so the soul is subjected to spirit. It receives impressions from spirit. The subjective mind, which we call soul, is not a knower in the sense that spirit is. It is not self-conscious. What's Holmes telling us there? Well, again, we just saw the quote that We're breaking soul and spirit up into two things only for our understanding of how they work together, but they're ultimately two aspects of the same thing. They're the non-physical aspect of the universe and their actions. But up at the highest levels of spirit is conscious awareness, where God thinks and creates. In a sense, God makes a choice, and then the soul, the creative medium, receives that thought and then simply acts upon it. Now, in many ways, this is often, in mystical terms, is seen as the divine masculine and the divine feminine. It's often represented in the yin yang symbol, but it's a representation. The fact that there is the creative process in the universe is sort of a dual nature. There is always the creative aspect of the thought or whatever is needing to be created, and that which acts upon the thought and creates it. And sometimes that's referred to as the masculine principle and the feminine principle. And we don't want to get locked into thinking about men and women in this, or genders in our expression in the human form. This is more a mystical nature that the entire universe works on an action of what can, at the human level or any kind of physical level, is working towards the impetus to create and the process that creates it. And we can think in terms of creating new forms through the process of birth in the physical realm. The coming together of two things to create the birth of something new. There's always that. And so that's expressed out in the mystical spiritual levels by spirit and soul, where they come together as one. The thought is then acted upon the creative medium to create whatever's going to be created. We need that process of the two-ness to create that aspect. In a sense, that's the divine trinity of action. The masculine and the feminine coming together, or the idea and the medium to act upon the idea to create the third thing, which is that aspect that comes out of it. All of life is a play out of that particular thing. But when he says that soul is not conscious, what he's saying is that soul doesn't make the choices. The creative medium doesn't make the choices. That's the role of the other aspect of the divine. Make the creative choice, act upon the choice. Make the creative choice, act upon the choice. It's both parts are needed. If the thought is created but there's not acted upon, nothing happens. So both are like co-creators of what's created in this universe. The subjective mind, which we call soul, is not a knower in the sense that spirit is. So that's because it doesn't consciously think. It's not self-conscious. It doesn't know itself. That doesn't mean it's not intelligent. And Holmes makes that in some of the quotes. I don't know if it's the one I skipped over some quotes, but he does stress in this that it doesn't mean that soul is not intelligent. It has to be intelligent to take the thought and act upon it, to have that very nature of a creative medium to act upon the thought. It has to have some intelligence. So, yeah. Anyway, next quote. The soul is immaterial as we think of matter, but it's the substance of spirit. And perhaps we should use the expression, the matter of spirit. Well, that's a wild one to get you wrap your mind around, isn't it? The soul, first off, let's break it down. The soul is immaterial. Well, I've already been saying that several times, is that soul and spirit are the non-physical aspects of this universe, that they work in tandem with one another to create the physical universe. The soul is immaterial as we think of matter. Matter is form, the body, etc. But it's the substance of spirit. Soul is the substance of spirit. Perhaps we should use the expression, the matter of spirit. Okay. It goes on from there, a little bit of a long quote. We know that matter comes from somewhere, physical stuff comes from somewhere, and the teachings that soul stuff is the source from which it comes. We must, however, distinguish soul stuff from soul. Wow, it sounds like doublespeak, doesn't it? Well, we're going to break it down. Soul is subjective intelligence, the principle just beneath spirit. The soul of the universe is next in principle to spirit and is the servant of spirit. The term soul stuff refers to the primordial or undifferentiated substance from which all things are made. Okay, I think I created a little chart. Yeah, here we go. We can sort of look at this again. Let's go back to that mental map of spirit down to form, vibratory levels at the highest and finest levels, moving downward into the deepest and densest and slowest moving vibratory levels. The chakras, the bodies, the tree of life and the Kabbalah, all of these spiritual maps that people have created through time have all had these flows from the highest down to the lowest, but they're all one. They're all one. We're only breaking them down in a map for us to understand how the universe works. So that's what was Holmes saying in that last thing. Well, he's trying to break it down even a little bit further. That's how I read him. He starts at that highest of spirit, and then there is soul as subjective intelligence. What does he mean by that? It's the intelligence that is the ability to take the thought of spirit and to act upon it. It's the creative medium aspect of it. It's the fact that it has a power to act upon the thought. So and subjective simply means inner. It's subjective to the conscious thought. The conscious aware thought flows into the inner aspect of intelligence that doesn't consciously have self-awareness, but acts upon the thought. And so those two are now creating it, but they have to have some stuff to create it out of. And that's why Holmes then makes a further distinction that there's an aspect in this middle layer of even more denser stuff that is the primordial soup from which all of the physical universe is going to be manifested. So then there is this soul stuff that is hardened into the form within the physical universe. And if we continue flowing down, there is what he refers to in the chapter. Now, he uses an old term called ether. And a lot of times in scientific circles, that's not, ether's been sort of discounted by scientists not being valid. But if we move beyond that, what Holmes is really trying to say is there is this sort of fluid level where things are soul, but they're in a very liquid state, unformed. And at a certain point, they flow into the physical universe where they become hardened, and they're the highest aspects of physical matter before physical matter breaks back down. So here's another way to look at it. And that body is the physical matter of which we know, where we can knock on the table here and see things, and is all stuff. So there's body as physical matter, but as it breaks down and goes back into the non-material, its vibratory level changes. It moves into levels of energy. It moves into its finer aspects of body, and then floats back into the non-aspects of body. And these are arbitrary thresholds. Where does it move from being physical into the ether aspects of the finest aspect of matter? And when does that move into being soul stuff that's in the level of soul? And where does that soul stuff flow into changing and just being back part of the subjective intelligence? I don't know. But I'm just saying that when you read this, I want you to visualize this map of finer and finer degradations. One interesting analogy you can use that can be helpful is to think about ice melting into water and water turning into steam. And although we can put, at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, water freezes and et cetera. But if we look at it just simply as a gradation, we can sense that there's this physical stuff that breaks down and at some point moves into, and it's still sort of body, and it's more body than it is soul. But at some point it breaks down out of body and becomes more soul than it is body. It's just vibratory levels. Another way you can look at it. So it's, again, ice, water, steam, moving up a continuum. It's the same stuff. It's just moving into different expressions. Another way is to look at the, gradations along a magnet. When does the positive become the negative as you move along the gradation of it? And it's just changing. And they're changing from one spot to another is so subtle that we don't often see it. And Holmes is just trying to break down this same thing. He's trying to make us see that there is this flow between spirit, soul, and form or body. I hope this is helpful. If you got a question, jump a question in there. Let's I said I would put my website up there. If you're interested, you can go to consciousbridge.com and then sign up for my newsletter. Just sent one out yesterday, by the way. And I'm routinely posting videos and writing blogs on that website. So if you enjoy the presentations I do regarding New Thought and things like that, feel free to go to those sites. I'll leave that up there for a few moments, but let's jump to another slide. Another quote. Yeah, Holmes says, while the soul may not choose, again, Soul has intelligence, but not the awareness of conscious thought to choose. Having no self-conscious of its own, yet it has intelligence, which is infinite, compared to the intelligence which we exhibit. So what's he saying there? He's trying to stress that even at this realm of the divine, because remember in this chapter we're talking about spirit in its totality, is that there is a intelligence that is embedded in soul that is greater than what we have access to, even with conscious thinking, and our smallness in a small individualized aspect of being a human being. So don't discount the intelligence that is within spirit. Within soul. It has the intelligence and power to produce, but no choice as to what to produce. Having no conscious mind of its own, it receives all ideas given it and tends to create a form around them. So this aspect of soul is simply a creative medium that takes thoughts and acts upon it and creates what we experience as this physical life. It must be apparent by now that the creative medium of spirit is the great mental law of the universe. It's the law obeying the will of spirit. It's the universal law of mind. All law is mind in action. Soul is the medium through which all law and all power operate. If there's one sentence there I want to key in on, all law is mind in action. Now, one of the confusing things when you first come to Science of Mind is that there are this aspect that he calls soul. He refers to it as creative medium. He refers to it as law. He will refer to it as subjective consciousness. And in fact, what he's trying to get at is that even though everything is one, there is this middle vibratory level that not only acts upon thoughts, but it also is the repository of all thinking. So later on, he stresses the fact in other subsequent chapters that soul is also, through his role as it's the repository of race consciousness. What does he mean by race consciousness? In Jung's terms, collective consciousness, the very nature that all thoughts are held in some place and act upon us. Some people like to refer to that as the Akashic records or things of that nature, that there is some area where all thinking and all thoughts that ever occurred are held in some capacity and they act upon us. So we're walking around thinking that we've got some sort of free will choice to create and think what we want to think. But what we have to remember is that in the level of soul, there is a repository of all of the thoughts, and they're subconscious. They're subconscious to us. We're not consciously aware of it, but they're totally impacting us. And so when we as humans at the human level try to change our thinking, we can consciously think that we're going to have a new thought, but then there are old patterns, old habits, the consciousness of the planet that is subconscious and is acting upon us. It's acting upon us. Now, one way I like to read Holmes is when he uses the word subjective and subconscious to sort of read them synonymously in a way, but that's not totally accurate. When he's using the word subjective, he's really saying it's subjective and inner and subjective to some other power. So subjective in a sense means I don't consciously think and choose. I'm subjective to this other force that makes the choice and then I act upon it. So that's what subjective means. But subconscious means it's below the level of our conscious awareness. So it's easy to sort of, equate them. And for most of the time when you're reading Holmes, you can equate those two terms. But subjective really has that connotation of subject to another power that I'm acting and taking it and acting upon. And subconscious means below the level of awareness, of conscious awareness. So in this case, all law is mind in action. All law is mind in action. What does it mean by that? Well, first off, if you were here a few weeks ago, he talked about mind. Everything is mind. People like to say that consciousness is the ground of all being. Everything contains consciousness. So Science of Mind teaches a sort of flip-flop of the normal realm of how we see the divine in the fact that God is consciousness. God is mind. God has embedded everything with aspects of its own being, including this thing that we call consciousness. And we've crossed a key threshold in our human evolution so that we became consciously self-aware. But everything that we've got around us, this desk, these computers, these cameras, the books behind me, they all have a degree of consciousness in them. Animals and plants have consciousness. Everything has consciousness within it. and that it's that consciousness is a force that we can tap into. And it's also because we've crossed a threshold in our human awareness that, we are able to have this sense of self-awareness. Yeah, yeah. So let me jump in here and I've got a couple of comments. Okay, Roy, it sounds like the soul is spirit, correct? Why do traditional Christians believe that the soul goes to hell and burns in hell if the soul is not form? Okay. Holmes, well, sometimes you have to make distinctions between how Holmes and New Thought uses the word soul and spirit. As we looked at a quote a moment ago, everything is God, everything is oneness, that it expresses in different ways. Soul and spirit are the non-material aspects of the universe. Soul and spirit are one aspect of in a sense, they're both the non-material aspect. And what we like, and so the soul, when we use that term soul, they're in a sense that they are two ways in which the non-material aspect of the universe ties together and works together to create the manifest universe. So they're not identical, but they're two manners in which the non-material aspect of the universe works. However, the word that when we use soul, we're using it totally different, which I'm glad you brought that up. In the common vernacular of our universe, and people walking around, they say, well, your soul, your soul, your soul. We think of soul in the common use of that word as being some sort of non-material entity that is within me, that if I believe in life after death, this soul leaves this physical body and moves on to another state. And although we can say the same thing, we don't believe that in Science of Mind, Holmes didn't teach that death was the end, he taught that we just shed these earthly clothes and moved on to other and higher dimensions and states, that if there's this infinite number of vibratory levels, which we could look at as multiple dimensions, multiple states of being in my father's mansion or many houses, that we move on from this earth to other dimensions beyond this. Now, many people believe in reincarnation, recycling here at Earth over and over and over. Holmes didn't teach that, but many people in Science of Mind and New Thought believe that. They believe that we recycle here. My personal feeling is, why does it have to be one or the other? Maybe we do recycle and come back here, and maybe we transcend this world and go on in some form. So it can be, I don't see it as an either or. But when we talk about soul, oftentimes that aspect of soul is sort of like a glued together part of your personality that transcends the world of form when you die and move on to other levels. And either, if you were bad, goes to some physical place called hell or some physical place called heaven. And of course, that's not what Science of Mind teaches either. We don't teach, we teach that heaven and hell are states of consciousness, that we can have hell on earth, and that when the manifest world seems to be, burning in flames and going crazy, then that's hell. If our individual lives are having moments of darkness of the soul, then that's hell. If we've made individual choices that are not in our greatest interest, and we have that karmic reaction to our bad thinking's a judgment term, but incorrect thinking that's lined in differentiating ourselves as separate and apart from everything. When we think in that way, when we're anchored in a non-dual way of looking at life, then we can have a hell experience that things are hell-like for us. And that heaven is when we get into that state of oneness and act from a sense of love and joy and peace and seeing that everything is one. So we can have heaven here on earth, or we can have hell on earth, and it's based on a choice of how we look at life. So it's not a place we move to. And so people like to think about in terms of the fact that soul is this physical thing, but it's just, it's... Anyway, I think I hammered your question well enough. We've got another question here, and we're running out of time, so let me go ahead and jump to that. Let's see. Shay says, subjective meaning God is deciding or acting on my behalf. Well, again, Shay, there's two things going on here. That's a good question. Keep in mind that this particular chapter in the language that Ernest is using here is trying to define the actions of the subjective at the level of spirit and not at the level of the individual human. He comes back in a later chapter. So is God deciding or acting on your behalf? Well, we could look at it that to a degree, the divine or spirit manifested and created this physical universe as a playground for us to live and move and grow and evolve, and that we are experiencing sort of a classroom experience where we move around and make free will choices, screw up, experience hell on earth, eventually make right choices, experience heaven on earth. And so the setup of the universe in some regards is as God has created this playground, so he's acting on your behalf by the very creation of this. On the other hand, God gave you free will to make choices, and you can either see heaven or see hell and create it in your own life in that way. So is he acting on your behalf when you are making wrong or sinning meaning missing the mark in your thinking? I think that God gives us the ability to navigate. I sometimes like to look at it as we got guardrails on, but they're pretty broad guardrails. And that if we go too far, we smack into a guardrail that keeps us in check to a degree. But the guardrails are so broad that we're not making God's not making all the choices for us. I don't believe there is like a divine, that we don't have free will and everything's preordained. Some people like to believe that, but that's not what's taught in Science of Mind. Science of Mind says that we have the ability to choose our thinking and our expressions in life. So God has set up the universe and given you free will and sort of put guardrails around you so that if you swing too way out of alignment, then karma, the action of karma, what do we mean by karma? Karma is the reaction to our thinking. And it's, if our thoughts and actions are in out of alignment, there will be a reaction. It's an act of a choice and then a reaction to our choices. And the reactions to our choices tend to bring us back into awareness. And that's why sometimes we can make mistake until we eventually learn the lesson. And then, hopefully by learning the lesson, employ it in our life. So if the setup of guardrails is deciding or acting on your behalf, then yes. But I look at it more like you're given latitude, but there's safety nets around you. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I tend to look at it. But I could be wrong. I like to say that in my classes. I'm telling you how my interpretation of what I think of it. And so Liz says, where does the pineal gland come in? Does Holmes talk about where the God molecule came in? I'm not sure. That's a good question. Holmes, does the aspect of the physical body have a relationship to our experience of God? Is there something embedded in us physically that is called to manifest and experience something leading us back to God? Now, specifically the God molecule that's talked about in scientific circles these days, I don't think that was a topic, an aspect of Holmes' writings and beliefs by the time he passed in early 1960. So does he talk about the pineal gland and the God molecule? I don't think he talks specifically about those. I could be wrong, but I don't recall seeing that anywhere in his writings, and I've read a lot and heard a lot. But I will say this. He does say that we are embedded with the divine nature, that we are embedded with divine characteristics, and that God is within us. God is within us in multiple ways, that the power of love is God. So what is love? I know we're going a little bit over, but hang on. Love is the calling within us to connect with something out that seems to be outside of us. Love, in an emotional sense, wants to say, even though I may think I'm separate and apart from everything, love is a power that calls me to be connected with something else. And so when I connect with love for my dog, love for my spouse, love for my children, my grandchildren, love is calling me to take out of a sense of being separate and connect with something outside of me. And if we keep growing in love, that expansive nature of love tends to have love move us to levels of higher and higher being and interconnectedness until we feel a sense of presence of some divine aspect within us and our love for the beloved itself. So love, and Teilhard de Chardin called it an evolutionary force because it really is evolving us from being separate and apart individuals to moving us back into unity consciousness. So love, but love's embedded in us. There's also God embedded in us, and Holmes talked about this, the desire to create. We have within us a desire to be creative. And that can show up in so many ways. Creative in our jobs, creative by creating a family, creative in the sense of wanting to create material like this, like his philosophy, or getting on and doing this today. This is creative. And so within us, we all have this creative urge. And the very nature that we are creating and whatever, and it's an individual urge within us. It has a commonality, is it calls for us to be creative. But it calls for us to be creative and explore and play in this playground of this material universe in which we live and be and ever being. So embedded in us is many, many God characteristics. And I've just expressed two: love and the desire to create. He called that the divine urge, by the way, if you want to go read on Holmes and divine urge. Does he talk about a physical something embedded in us that is in a pineal gland and called a God molecule? No. But there is something vibratory embedded in us that calls us out of feeling separate and apart and back into unity. And to me, that's part of those guardrails I was talking about a moment ago. That when we can go off track, when we think that we are separate and apart from one another, then we're getting off track. And anything that sort of like nudges us, yeah, we still got free will choice and we can screw up and screw up and screw up. But eventually we get nudged. We get nudged by the various guardrails. And the biggest guardrails are inside us. With God being inside us, and God reminds us, and God urges us to live our lives in unity and in love and in joy. So anyway, hey, great questions. And I have gone over by a number of minutes. I hope this has been beneficial to you. I hope that you have gotten something from this conversation. I hope that you explore the concepts of this chapter and the future chapters at a greater, higher level. I hope that this discussion of using Holmes' words and map making with a stratification serves you in reading and understanding Holmes at a great level. I would encourage you, if you like the programming here on the New Thought Media Network, to go to their website and click on donate and make donations. This is a nonprofit organization. Most of the speakers are, such as myself, are volunteers who do this simply for the ability to have the joy of shedding or sharing with you these thoughts and hopefully furthering your life and understanding along a little better. Great comments and questions today. I hope you join the speaker next week. And be sure to check out my website at consciousbridge.com. And I want to thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful week. And I hope that this time has been beneficial for you and that you navigate the physical world in the highest and greatest ways, always staying anchored in the awareness of the oneness of the universe, that there is an aspect of your being that knows the truth at the deepest levels. Love and blessings to all of you. Till next time.